and as I present it to my Western colleagues. And my intention in doing so is to let the text stand alone as a work of philosophy valuable in its own right to anyone interested in fundamental metaphysical, epistemological, and soteriological questions, not as a text to be studied only as part of the history of philosophy or comparative philosophy. Moreover, my exposition will be deliberately sympathetic. My goal is not to assess Nagarjuna's philosophy, but to present and elucidate it, and to do so in a way that, while making the text accessible to Western philosophers, does not disguise the fact that the text made accessible is an early Indian Madhyamaka philosophical treatise, read by a Western philosopher through an extended Indo-Tibetan commentarial and academic tradition. It is neither a contemporary treatise nor a 2nd-century text transported miraculously to us without the distortion of time and cultural distance. Buddhologists may lament the lack of critical discussion of Buddhist antecedents and commentarial sequelae, and my Tibetan colleagues may be uncomfortable with some of the tendentious extensions of arguments beyond the dialectical contexts in which they originally arose. Despite this, I hope that for Western philosophers interested in approaching Madhyamaka in particular or Buddhist philosophy in general, and for students of Nagarjuna's philosophy in the West, this exposition will make his text more accessible. Dedicatory verses. I prostrate to the perfect Buddha, the best of teachers, who taught that whatever is dependently arisen is unceasing, unborn, unannihilated, not permanent, not coming, not going, without distinction, without identity, and free from conceptual construction. Dedicatory verses are often treated as mere performatives. But these are special and announce in a subtle but powerful way the program of the Mulamadhyamakakarika. There is a common point being made in the 4 pairwise denials, but also a specific insight being expressed in each. The relation between the conventional and the ultimate that will be developed in the text is also expressed poetically in the dedication. In fact, Candrakirti, in Prasanapada, argues that the dedication determines the prasanjika reading of Nagarjuna's text. Candrakirti's point is this: in the 4 pairwise denials, Nagarjuna is announcing that the Madhyamaka philosopher will make no positive assertions about the fundamental nature of things. But this claim must be qualified in several ways. For one thing, we must take the phrase "the nature of things" very seriously. That is, Nagarjuna will be refusing to say anything about the essence of anything exactly because he will deny the coherence and utility of the concept of an essence. For another, it is important to see that the predications that are rejected are intended to be understood as made from the ultimate standpoint. That is, the assertions that are being denied are assertions about the final nature of phenomena that emerge from philosophical analysis. They are not meant to be ordinary assertions dependent upon conventions. Nagarjuna will deny that it is possible to assert anything from the ultimate standpoint. He will urge that all truth is relative and conventional. In fact, as we shall see, these qualifications turn out to be mutually entailing. But each pair is significant in its own right. To say that whatever is dependently arisen is unceasing and unborn is to emphasize that dependent arising amounts to emptiness, and emptiness amounts to non-existence in the ultimate sense. While, as we shall see, Nagarjuna defends the conventional existence of phenomena, he will urge that none of them ultimately exist, that none of them exist independently of convention with identities and natures that they possess in themselves. Therefore, he will argue, nothing ultimately is born, and from the ultimate standpoint there is nothing to cease. This is a deep point, which only emerges completely through a reading of the whole text. But we can say at this point that this insight contains within it the seeds of the eventual equation of the phenomenal world with emptiness, of samsara with nirvana, and of the conventional and the ultimate that are the hallmarks of the prasajika madhyamaka view. When Nagarjuna claims that whatever is dependently arisen is unannihilated and not permanent, he indicates that the dependently arisen world and all of its contents are, in virtue of being dependently arisen and dependent upon conditions, impermanent. Phenomena come into existence when the conditions upon which they depend obtain, and they cease to exist when the conditions for their continued existence no longer obtain. This impermanence, he will argue, entails their non-existence from the ultimate standpoint. For there will be no principled way to assert criteria for identity for phenomena that distinguish them in any principled way from their conditions. Nor can we find any essence they themselves have that determines their identity. The criteria for identity we posit will end up being purely conventional. Hence the same is true for any claims of substantial difference between things. But this impermanence and lack of intrinsic identity, while it amounts to the impossibility of ultimate existence, is not equivalent to annihilation. The empirical reality of things, on Nagarjuna's analysis, is not denied by asserting their emptiness. Finally, to assert that things are not coming, not going is to assert that the phenomenal world does not contain intrinsically identifiable entities that persist independently with those identities over time. As a consequence, there can be no sense in saying that any entity, independent of conventional imputation, comes into existence, remains in existence, or goes out of existence. The final remark that the phenomenal world is free from conceptual imputation raises a tension that is central to Madhyamaka philosophy and that animates the whole of the text, the tension between the desire to characterize the ultimate nature of things and the recognition that all characterization is conventional. For Nagarjuna will urge that all conventional phenomena are conceptually designated, depending for whatever identity and existence they have on such designation, and that this merely imputed status is their ultimate nature. Despite this, however, he will urge that seeing this fact is at the same time to see that the nature naively imputed to things and the nature they appear to us to have inherent existence is wholly false. In themselves, from their side, things are free of that imputation, even though there is really nothing at all that can be said from their side. This dynamic philosophical tension, a tension between the Madhyamaka account of the limits of what can be coherently said and its analytical ostension of what can't be said without paradox but must be understood, must constantly be borne in mind in reading the text. It is not an incoherent mysticism, but it is a logical tightrope act at the very limits of language and metaphysics. Chapter 1: Examination of Conditions. Central to this first chapter is the distinction between causes and conditions, skt, hetu and pratyaya, tib, rgyu and rkyen. This distinction is variously drawn and is controversial, 14, and it is arguably differently understood in Sanskrit and Tibetan. The way I will understand it here, I argue, makes good, coherent sense not only of this chapter, but of Mulamadhyamakakarika as a whole. Briefly, we will understand this distinction as follows. When Nagarjuna uses the word cause, hetu, rgyu, he has in mind an event or state that has in it a power, kriya, bya-ba, 15 to bring about its effect and has that power as part of its essence or nature, svabhava, bzhin. When he uses the term condition on the other hand, pratyaya, rkyen, he has in mind an event, state, or process that can be appealed to in explaining another event, state, or process without any metaphysical commitment to any occult connection between explanandum and explanans. In Chapter 1, Nagarjuna, we shall see, argues against the existence of causes and for the existence of a variety of kinds of conditions. Things are not, however, quite this simple. For in the philosophical context in which Nagarjuna is writing, there are those indeed, including most Buddhist philosophical schools, who would accept his classification of conditions, but who would then assert that in order for conditions to function as explanatory, they must themselves have an independent inherent existence. Some